Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I am your host, and today we are going to try and unravel a knot that I think pretty much every single person listening has felt tighten in their chest at one point or another.
It is so good to be here. And yeah, today we are definitely dealing with knots, but also how to untie them. Or I guess more accurately, how to just let them dissolve completely.
Exactly. We are really trying to set the stage today for a vibe that is, well, it's relaxed, it's a little bit spooky, but also, and I do not use this word lightly, it is hilarious.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we are standing at this really weird intersection where deep psychology meets the paranormal, and they kind of, I don't know, awkwardly bump into each other at a crowded dance hall.
It is such a fascinating intersection, too. I mean, usually we think of psychology as something that happens entirely inside the brain, right?
Yeah.
Synapses firing, chemicals balancing out. And then we think of the paranormal as something that happens out there. Ghosts in the attic, bumps in the night. But the material we are covering today suggests there isn't really a barrier between the two. The inside can become the outside very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I want to start with a question for you, and really for everyone listening right now, it is kind of a vibe check. Have you ever been so stressed, so burned out, or just so incredibly bitter about a situation that you felt like you were falling apart?
Oh, for sure.
Like you literally say the words, I am coming apart at the seams.
I think we have all been exactly there. Just that overwhelming feeling of fragmentation, where you feel like you're losing your grip on who you actually are because the pressure is just way too high.
Right. But here's the hook. And this is where we leave standard psychology behind and enter the twilight zone. What if you actually did fall apart?
Right, literally.
Yes. What if those fragmented parts of your stress didn't just stay in your head as a migraine, but actually detached from you, took on a physical form, and started walking around a room totally ruining everyone else's evening?
That is a terrifying thought, honestly. And yet, that is exactly what we are discussing today. The idea that we can literally manufacture pseudo-realities out of our own bad moods.
We are definitely entering the archives today. Specifically, we are doing a deep dive into session 422 of the early sessions, book 9 of the Seth Material.
This is such a classic session. And for those who like to track the timeline of these things, this was recorded on July 10th, 1968.
So just picture the scene for a second. It is the late 60s. The summer of love is arguably turning into something a little bit more complex at this point.
Yeah, the vibe was shifting.
Definitely shifting. You have the heat, the massive cultural revolution happening outside. And inside this apartment in Elmira, New York, Jane Roberts and her husband, Robert Butts, are sitting down for a session with the entity known as Seth.
And before we go any further into that room, we do need to make our standard disclaimer for everyone listening.
Oh, yes, please do.
We are exploring the contents of this specific session for analysis and discussion. This deep dive is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We aren't here to tell you what to believe, but just to really unpack what was said in these transcripts.
Absolutely. And our mission today is very specific. We are exploring the idea that repressed emotions don't just give you an ulcer, although, spoiler alert, we will find out they do that too.
They definitely do.
But we are looking at the possibility that they can actually create apparitions. We are talking about the literal biology of ghosts and the safety of spontaneity.
The biology of ghosts. That is such a striking phrase, isn't it? We usually think of ghosts as ethereal, spiritual non-things, just wisps of smoke or light. But Seth gets very specific about the biological cost of these projections. He treats it almost like a chemical equation.
He really does. And I want to get into that biological cost so badly because it is honestly one of the funniest diet tips I have ever heard in my life.
It really is.
But we will get there. First, let's look at the context of this specific session. It is a Wednesday night. Jane Roberts, who, just a reminder, Seth refers to as Ruburt, is having a really low-spirited evening.
We have all had the Wednesday blues. It is a universal feeling.
Totally. It is the middle of the week. Maybe the humidity in New York is high. She is just feeling heavy. So just after supper, she sits down and writes a poem called Rapunzel.
Right.
Now, everyone listening, I want you to imagine this scenario. She thinks she is just venting. She thinks she is just scribbling out some angst in a notebook to make herself feel a little better. But Seth comes through in the session later that night, and he has a completely different take on what just happened with that poem.
This is exactly what distinguishes Seth's view of creativity from the standard view we all hold. We usually judge art by the final product, right? Is the poem good? Does it rhyme? Is the meter correct?
Is it going to get published?
Exactly. But Seth doesn't care about any of that. He looks entirely at the energetic intent behind the action. He tells Ray to tell Jane that she hasn't lost her break self. It hasn't gone anywhere. She had just been denying it expression.
And he points directly to this poem, Rapunzel, as the key. He says the poem wasn't just words on a page. He calls it an intuitional inspiration.
That is the key concept here. He says that the act of writing the poem at this specific time, regardless of what the poem was actually about, represented a willingness to allow the spontaneous self-expression.
I just love that so much. It didn't matter if the poem was a masterpiece or absolute doggerel. It didn't matter if the subject matter was depressing. It was the physical act of opening the tap.
Precisely. And Seth uses this fantastic analogy here that really helps explain why this works so well. He compares Jane writing this poem to a native rain dance.
A rain dance. Let's unpack that for a second, because usually when we think of a rain dance in modern culture, we think of superstition. We think of people dancing to somehow magically control the weather.
But if you look at the psychology of the ritual, the natives don't dance because it is already raining. They dance because there is a severe drought. They dance to induce the rain.
Right.
They are signaling to the environment, but much more importantly, they are signaling to their own psyche that they are ready for the shift. They are aligning themselves with the exact outcome they want.
So Jane writing Rapunzel was her personal rain dance. She was experiencing a massive drought of joy, a drought of spontaneity, and by writing the poem, she was dancing to induce the return of her own bright personality.
Correct. Seth says the poem represents an incantation. It is a clear signal to the inner self. By taking the time to write it, she was essentially telling her spontaneous self, okay, the door is unlocked. It is safe to come out now. I'm finally listening.
That is surprisingly practical advice for anyone feeling creatively or emotionally blocked. We tend to judge our creative output so harshly. Like, you sit down and think, is this email witty enough? Or is this drawing good enough to show anyone on Instagram? Or if I write in my journal, am I just going to sound stupid to myself?
We are our own worst critics.
Always. But Seth is saying the quality is entirely secondary. The actual magic is in the permission you give yourself to just do the thing.
It is the willingness to allow the spontaneous self-expression. That is where the magic lives. Even if the emotion fueling the poem is sad or angry or bitter, the fact that you are expressing it creatively turns it into art. And that is inherently a healthy action.
It takes the energy out of the suppression box and moves it into the expression box.
Precisely. You are keeping the energy moving instead of letting it stagnate.
So we have Jane writing poetry to summon her own spirit back. That is sort of the inspiring part of the deep dive today. But then Seth pivots. And when I say he pivots, I mean he takes a hard left turn straight into the Twilight Zone.
He really does. He moves from this lovely metaphor of poetry to a very literal and honestly somewhat disturbing example of what happens when that expression goes wrong, or rather, when it manifests in a way we are definitely not expecting.
Yes. This brings us to the story of the York Beach apparitions.
A truly classic case study in the Seth Material.
So, let's set the scene for you listening, because the atmosphere here is incredibly crucial to understanding what happened. We have to go back in time a bit, from 1968 back to the summer of 1963. Jane and Rob are on vacation in York Beach, Maine.
Sounds nice on paper.
Right. Now, when I think of York Beach in the early 60s, I am thinking saltwater taffy, arcade games, maybe a really nice breeze coming off the Atlantic Ocean.
A nice, relaxing coastal getaway. Theoretically, anyway.
Theoretically. But apparently, they were not having a relaxing time at all. Seth describes them as being full of psychic discontent. They're at a crowded dancing establishment.
Which creates such a funny mental image to start with.
Yeah.
A 1963 dance hall. It is probably loud. There's a live band playing. People are doing the twist or the mashed potato. It is hot, sweaty, and just full of life.
And in the corner, you have Jane and Rob sitting in a booth, absolutely miserable.
Desperate, Seth actually says. They were so desperate and so full of frustration that they did something completely unconscious. And this is where it gets absolutely wild. They projected images of themselves.
Now, I want to be really, really clear about what this means for everyone listening. We aren't talking about them just sitting there imagining themselves dancing. We aren't talking about a vivid daydream. Seth is saying they created pseudo-realities.
Yes.
They created actual apparitions that were physically located in the room with them.
And these weren't idealized versions of themselves, were they?
Yeah.
He didn't project the cool, fun Jane and Rob, who were the life of the party, to compensate for their terrible mood.
No. Which is exactly what I would have done. If I am feeling lame at a party, I want to hallucinate a version of myself that is just crushing it on the dance floor. Everyone is cheering.
Naturally.
But quite the opposite happened here. Seth describes the images as older, weary selves, the lines of frustration and bitterness clearly written in the features.
Just imagine that visual for a second. You were at a club, you were trying to have a good time, or at least you were trying to pretend to have a good time.
Mhm.
You look over into the corner or near the edge of the dance floor, and you see a miserable, aged version of yourself glaring back at you, just judging everything.
It is the ultimate buzzkill. It is like the ghost of Christmas future, but it is just the ghost of you being grumpy on a Tuesday.
But it creates this fascinating feedback loop. They were feeling bitter and frustrated, so they unconsciously manufactured these ghosts that perfectly embodied that bitterness.
Yeah.
They externalized the emotion into a physical form.
But here's where I have to stop and ask the skeptic's question. Seth isn't just saying, poof, magic, is he? He actually explains the how. And this is where the title of today's deep dive really comes from. He breaks down the literal biology of a ghost.
This is the science of the session, and it is where Seth really differentiates his whole philosophy from standard ghost stories or folklore. He calls the whole process a matter of biological economics.
Biological economics, I absolutely love that term. It sounds like a college course I would definitely fail, but I love it anyway.
It is brilliant. He explains that to create an apparition, even a temporary one like the ones at York Beach, you need ingredients. You need raw materials. You cannot just create something from nothing.
Like baking a cake, but, a spooky, semi-transparent cake.
Exactly like that. The first ingredient is emotional energy. That provides the pattern, the blueprint, and the initial impetus. It's the fuel for the whole project. But energy alone isn't enough to make something visible to other people.
Right, because Seth claims other people in the dance hall actually saw these things.
He says they had instant physical validity. They were actively observed by strangers. So to get that physical validity, the projection needs physical components. It needs mass. And where do those physical components come from?
The creator.
The creator's own body. Seth states very clearly that the physical body lends portions of its own chemical structure.
This is the part that completely blew my mind, and I honestly laughed out loud reading the transcript. He talks about actual protein loss and high carbohydrate loss.
It is amazing, isn't it? He says there was a protein loss in your own parts. The body has to work overtime to build these pseudo-frameworks out of its own supplies.
So let's be literal here. Seth is suggesting that if Jane and Rob had stepped on a scale immediately before and after this incident, they would have weighed less.
Theoretically, yes. Though the actual physical weight might be negligible, the resource drain on the system is not. He says the metabolism quickens drastically. The body is stripping its own reserves of protein and carbs to build this external image.
I can see the marketing campaign for this right now. Forget keto. Forget paleo. Try the poltergeist workout. Burn carbs fast by manifesting a phantom.
Lose 10 pounds of water weight and protein by aggressively haunting your local library.
It is hilarious, but if you stop laughing for a second, it is also kind of terrifying. It implies that our emotions, when they get intense enough, can literally strip mine our bodies for resources to build things in the real world.
It reinforces the idea that thoughts are things, not just metaphorically, biologically. If you have enough psychic discontent, your body will sacrifice its own nutrition to give that discontent a form. It prioritizes the creation of the reality over the maintenance of the host.
But why? Why would the body do that? It seems so completely self-destructive. Evolutionarily speaking, why would I burn my precious protein to make a scary ghost of myself at a dance hall?
Seth argues it is actually a survival mechanism, or at least a very extreme coping mechanism. He says they did this to face their bitterness head-on.
To objectify it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Think about it. When the emotion is purely inside you, it is this nebulous, overwhelming cloud. You are just drowning in it. But by projecting these weary, bitter cells outward, Jane and Rob could actually see them. They could look at them across the room and say, wow, that is really ugly. And in seeing it, they accepted it.
Seth says, you then, for the first time, completely accepted it as a portion of yourself. At this point, it returned to you and lost its explosive, isolated importance.
It is like lancing a boil. If you keep the infection inside, it just spreads and gets worse. If you push it out, it looks gross. It is incredibly unpleasant to look at, but the pressure's finally gone. The emotion returned to them as just a normal feeling, not a monster.
So the York Beach ghosts were basically really expensive therapy. They cost a lot of protein, probably a good chunk of whatever they had for dinner, but they stopped Jane and Rob from completely exploding psychically.
Exactly. They externalized the conflict so they could resolve it. But this leads us directly into the next segment, because the obvious question is, what happens if you don't project it outward? What happens if you keep the lid firmly on the pot and refused to let the ghost walk around.
That is the section we are calling the traveling troublemakers. And honestly, this concept scares me way more than the ghosts do.
It really should. It hits much closer to home for most of us.
So we have established that you can project energy out to make a ghost. But Seth says if you don't do that and you don't accept the emotion, you inevitably project it inward.
He makes a very bold statement here that challenges a lot of modern medicine. He says physical illness is not a natural condition.
That goes against almost everything we are taught. We are taught that illness just happens. You catch a bug, genetics kick in, things just break down over time.
But Seth argues that the body naturally wants to be healthy. It is a brilliant self-correcting system. But if you have these dissociated, denied emotions, these parts of yourself you flat out refuse to acknowledge, the body uses those exact same chemical and protein reserves we just talked about to create a different kind of reality.
Instead of a ghost at a dance hall, you get an ulcer.
Precisely. He says the body uses the materials to form an ulcer, a goiter, or to affect other physiological changes.
So an ulcer is basically an unmanifested ghost. It is a haunt that stayed inside the house.
That is a very distinct and accurate way to put it. It is the exact same energy, the exact same biological cost, but it is directed against the self because the person refuses to look at it or let it out into the world.
He literally calls them traveling troublemakers.
Yes. If the intense emotion isn't anchored in a specific organ right away, it just wanders through the system, causing havoc wherever it goes. It is like a rogue program running in the background of a computer. It eats up processing power, or in this case, your protein and carbs, and completely disrupts the normal functions.
And this brings us directly to Jane's specific struggle. Because in this session, Seth isn't just philosophizing. He is doing a bit of a diagnostic on Jane. He talks about why Jane was having physical symptoms at this particular time in her life.
And it all comes down to control. Seth notes, quite humorously actually, to force a lid on that pot was a job.
Meaning Jane was working incredibly hard just to stay buttoned up and appear normal?
Right. Jane had this immense spontaneous energy. He was a medium, a poet, a brilliant writer, but he was terrified of that energy. Seth says he feared that releasing his spontaneous self suddenly would engulf him completely.
It is that fear of losing control. I think a lot of people listening can deeply relate to that. The feeling of, if I really let go, if I really say what I think, if I really do what I want to do, I will blow up my entire life.
Exactly. We build these massive dams because we're terrified of the flood. Seth identifies this specific fear, the fear of sudden release, as the main reason for the physical symptoms Jane was experiencing. He says Jane associated free arms with abandonment.
Now, when he says abandonment there, he doesn't mean being left alone at a bus stop by your friends.
No. He means wild abandon, recklessness, a total lack of discipline. Jane felt that if he wasn't rigid, he wasn't safe. He equated extreme control with survival.
And Seth completely flips that script. He basically tells her that her safety mechanism is the very thing that is killing her.
He does. And this is the core philosophy of the entire session. We think we are safe when we are rigid. We think we are safe when we act like statues, unmoving, predictable, solid. The logic is, if I don't move, I can't fall over.
But Seth says, quote, always trust motion and change over permanency or rigidity.
He tells Jane to imagine the self as fluid, as wind or water, and not as a statue.
Be like water. It is very Bruce Lee, but it is also just basic physics when you think about it.
It is timeless wisdom. Think about a statue. It requires constant structural integrity just to stand there. If the ground shakes even a little, the statue cracks. If the wind blows hard enough, the statue topples over and shatters. But water just flows around obstacles. You literally cannot break water.
Seth argues that we are only truly safe when we trust our spontaneity.
And this is the counterintuitive truth that is so hard for us to grasp. We hold on tight because we want to be safe. But the holding on is what exhausts us. It consumes our protein, it consumes our energy, and it makes us incredibly brittle.
He says, the spontaneous self is the healer.
That is the quote everyone needs to remember from this deep dive. The spontaneous self isn't a wild animal that needs to be kept in a cage. It is the part of you that actually knows how to heal, how to adapt to new situations, and how to move forward.
Seth says it shouldn't be treated like a stepchild.
Right. Jane was treating her spontaneity like the unwanted relative at the family reunion. Just go sit in the corner and be quiet so we look normal. But Seth says it needs to merge in balance with the rest of the personality.
It is really all about integration. You don't have to be only spontaneous. You don't have to run around screaming all the time and throwing things. You balance it with your intellect, your reasoning, your responsibilities, but you do not lock it in the basement.
Because if you lock it in the basement, it starts banging on the pipes. and that banging is your ulcer.
I love how Seth weaves this really high-level, almost cosmic philosophy with very mundane, funny examples. We have to talk about the Prentice letter, because this brings everything down from cosmic ghosts straight into office politics.
Oh, the business letter. This is such a great little anecdote that really humanizes Jane and the whole situation.
So apparently, Jane wrote a letter to a guy named Prentice, and it wasn't exactly standard corporate speak.
No, not at all. We don't know exactly what was in the letter, but Seth mentions that a Miss Carr was quite upset by it. She was totally flabbergasted because it did not fit under the category of proper business procedure.
I can just imagine some strict 1960s secretary clutching her pearls because Jane didn't use the correct letterhead or maybe said something way too casual for a Tuesday afternoon.
But Seth's take on the whole drama is hilarious. He basically says, well, it worked, didn't it?
He says, "It made the impression that I intended, however, and you will be hearing shortly."
It perfectly proves his point. Spontaneous action, even if it breaks the rigid rules of proper procedure, often gets the job done much better than following the script. It cuts right through the noise.
It is a massive validation of that raw, authentic energy. Even in the business world, we are so heavily trained to be robots in the workplace. Per my last email, circling back on this, let's touch base. Seth is saying sometimes you just need to be a real human being.
Especially in business. People respond to authenticity even if it shocks them a little bit at first. A robot is safe, but a human is interesting and effective.
Now, speaking of shocks, Rob Jane's husband tries to slip in a really big metaphysical question near the end of the session, and this moment really made me laugh because it is just so relatable.
He always does this. It is late at night, they've been channeling for a while, everyone is exhausted, and Rob decides this is the absolute perfect time to ask about the nature of the larger Seth and his perception of time systems.
Which is exactly like asking your partner for an explanation of quantum string theory 5 minutes before you brush your teeth for bed.
Exactly, and Seth just brushes it off. But he does it with such great personality. He smiles, through Jane, of course, and says his attention is not directed upon it. It would take me many hours to explain this.
But then he teases Rob. He says, effectively, I mean, if you want me to, I will start explaining it right now.
Knowing full well that they are both completely exhausted, and Rob quickly backpedals. He says, well, I'd like to, but... And then he just calls for a break.
It really shows the personality of Seth. He is not just a dry encyclopedia of facts or distant, emotionless spirit. He is funny. He understands human limits. He knows exactly when Rob is pushing his luck.
He really does. And he uses that break to give Jane a very specific visualization exercise. This ties all the way back to the York Beach ghosts and the idea of uncreating things.
This was fascinating and weird. He references a seance they did years prior, back in 1964.
Right. Apparently, in that session, Jane had manifested extra hands.
They stop right there. Extra hands, like ethereal ectoplasm or actual physical knuckles that you could touch.
Seth refers to hand formations, or knuckles. It implies some level of physical manifestation, again, using the body's resources. It is entirely consistent with the York Beach phenomenon, using the physical body to build a temporary form.
And the instruction he gives her here.
Seth tells Jane to simply imagine those extra portions, those extra hands disappearing, just dissolving into nothing.
Just like the York Beach images dissolved when they looked at them.
Exactly. He is teaching her that she has the power to construct and destruct these forms. If she can build a ghost, or an ulcer, or extra hands with her mind and body, she can also disassemble it.
It brings it all back to personal agency. We aren't victims of our biology. We are the drivers of it.
We are the architects. But the problem is we are often building structures we don't even remember ordering. We are signing massive work orders in our sleep.
That is a really powerful thought. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We have covered bad poetry, hungry ghosts, ulcers, office politics, and phantom knuckles. It is quite a mixed bag.
It all connects to the much bigger picture of how we live our daily lives. We create our reality. And Seth means that quite literally. We use our proteins, our carbs, our chemical reserves to build our experience. Every single emotion you hold on to is an investment of your physical resources.
So if you are feeling constantly exhausted, maybe ask yourself, what am I building right now?
Exactly. Are you building a giant wall to hold back your spontaneous self? Because that is incredibly expensive. That takes a massive amount of energy. Keeping a beach ball held underwater is so much harder than just letting it float.
Suppressing the spontaneous self takes far more energy than letting it run free. That is the ultimate key takeaway for me here. We always think control saves energy. We think, if I just sit still and don't react to anything, I will be well rested. But control creates friction.
And friction creates heat and burnout and eventually illness, Seth is saying. Let it flow. Emotions are always better out than in. Don't let them become traveling troublemakers wandering through your body.
And I think there is a real chill factor here, too. Reflecting on the York Beach story, those ghosts were scary. They were weary and ugly. But they were really just parts of Jane and Rob.
They were just parts of themselves. They hadn't hugged yet. They hadn't accepted them. Once they finally looked them in the eye, the ghosts vanished.
So if you have ghosts in your life, whether they're literal hauntings or just haunting memories, anxieties, or bitter feelings, maybe they are just waiting for you to acknowledge them.
To accept them as a valid portion of yourself so they can finally return to the whole, the monster stops being a scary monster when you realize it is just wearing your face.
I love that. Now, before we wrap up today, we have to give credit where credit is due. This isn't just us riffing. This is deep channeled wisdom.
Absolutely. This deep dive was entirely based on the Seth Material, specifically session 422.
We strongly recommend that if this sparked your curiosity, and honestly, how could it not? You need to go to the source. You cannot get the full picture just from a summary.
We are just skimming the surface of a very deep ocean here. The depth of insight in the actual books is unparalleled. You should absolutely visit the New Awareness Network.
You can find their website and bookstore at sethcenter.com/theearlysessions. Go buy the books, read them yourself, support the preservation of this incredible material. It is literally like a manual for being human that we all forgot to read.
It is worth every single penny.
And finally, I want to leave you with a provocative thought, something to really chew on as you go about your week.
Let's hear it.
Seth told Jane to view herself as wind or water, not a statue. I want you to look at your life right now. The stress, the holding on, the constant need for control, the sheer amount of protein you are burning just to keep it all together.
Are you building a flowing river? Or are you just building a really expensive, heavy statue that is exhausting to hold up?
Drop the statue. Be the water. Thank you so much for listening.
See you in the next deep dive.
But wait, before we actually cut the feed today, I have to ask you something that has been bothering me since we started. That specific part about the high carbohydrate loss. Do you think that that explains the freshman 15 or why we crave sugar so intensely when we are emotional? Are we unconsciously trying to fuel a ghost?
That is actually a fascinating hypothesis. Think about it. When you are highly emotional, your system is revving up to create something. Maybe not a visual apparition in a dance hall, but certainly a dense emotional reality. Your body knows it needs fuel to build the reality of your sadness or your stress.
So when I'm sitting on the couch eating an entire pint of ice cream after a really bad day, I am not stress eating. I am gathering raw materials for psychic projection.
You could definitely tell yourself that.
Mm.
I need this sugar to manifest my frustration into a visible form. But Seth would probably say the much healthier route is to just write the bad poem instead.
True. The poem definitely costs fewer calories.
And probably less protein. And it scares the neighbors a lot less than manifesting a ghost in your living room.
You know, digging a little deeper into that York Beach incident, the detail about the lines of frustration being written on the features of the apparitions, it really strikes me how incredibly specific Seth is. He doesn't just say, it looked vaguely like you. He describes the exact quality of the face.
It is very specific.
Yeah.
And notice he says they were hysterical productions.
Hysterical in the medical sense, right? Not the funny sense.
Right. A conversion symptom. Usually in classical Freudian terms, hysteria converts a psychological stress into blindness or paralysis. The brain says, I can't see the thing I don't want to see. But here, because Jane and Rob were so psychically potent, it converted into a fully external hallucination.
It makes you wonder how many classic ghost stories are actually just that. People with high psychic energy and high stress, unconsciously projecting their own internal baggage so hard that it literally becomes visible to other people.
Seth definitely hints at that possibility. He says, and this is a wild quote, it is highly unusual but possible that the consciousness could then split itself up, some residing in the new image.
Wait, residing in the new image? So a part of their actual consciousness was inside the ghosts.
That is the direct implication, yes. You aren't just painting a 3D picture. You are actually putting a fragment of your soul into it.
Mm-hmm.
That is why it is so physically and mentally draining. You are literally fracturing yourself. You are sending a pilot out in an escape pod.
That circles all the way back to the intro, the feeling of falling apart.
Literally falling apart. You are sitting in the booth, but a piece of your consciousness is out on the dance floor, glaring back at you.
And the cure was simply realizing, hey, that is me.
That is me, and it is actually okay that I feel that way right now. The pure acceptance brings the fragment back home. The escape pod redocks with the mothership.
It is radical self-acceptance. Not just accepting the good, fun, polite parts of yourself, but accepting the ugly, weary, bitter parts too.
Because if you don't accept the bitter parts, they start walking around the room or eating your stomach lining.
I will take the walking around the room option, honestly. It seems slightly less painful.
I don't know. Imagine the sheer social awkwardness of that. You're trying to impress a date, and your internal bitterness is just standing by the bar making faces at everyone.
Sorry, everyone. That is just my resentment over the quarterly earnings report standing by the punch bowl. Just ignore him. He is running low on protein.
He is just burning some carbs. He will fade away in an hour or so.
But seriously, the whole concept of biological economics completely changes how I view my own health. It makes me want to be so much more careful about what I allow myself to dwell on.
It really should change your perspective. It frames illness not as a random attack from the outside world, but as a severe misallocation of internal resources. You are spending your daily health budget on suppression projects.
Suppression projects. That is a really great way to put it. We are like corrupt city councils, completely diverting funds from essential road maintenance to build giant concrete walls that nobody even needs.
And then we wonder why the roads are full of massive potholes.
The ulcer is the pothole.
Exactly. And the spontaneous self is the maintenance crew that just wants to fix the road, but we refuse to let them on the site because they don't wear the right uniform.
Because they are wild. They might paint the road a weird color or sing while they work.
The road would be smooth and functional.
Seth actually says, Rupert's spontaneous nature is tolerant, sunny, quite natively good.
That is such a lovely, reassuring detail. We are always so afraid that our deep inner self is a monster. We think deep down we are just bad or chaotic. But Seth says, actually, it is sunny. It is tolerant. You are basically afraid of a puppy.
A puppy that we have somehow convinced ourselves is a dangerous wolf.
And so we board up all the windows and starve ourselves just to keep the puppy outside in the cold.
It is tragic, really, when you think about it that way. But it is also incredibly hopeful, because the puppy is still out there.
It has gone nowhere. That was the very first thing Seth said in the session regarding her bright self. It is just waiting for you to do the rain dance.
So to bring it all back to the practical for everyone listening, if you are feeling that block today, that heavy Wednesday blues feeling, what is the one thing they should do right now?
Do something totally unscripted. Write a bad poem on a napkin. Draw a terrible picture. Dance in your kitchen for 2 minutes. Make a weird noise you haven't made since you were a kid.
Send a business letter that breaks all the rules.
Maybe start with the kitchen dance. Let's not get anyone fired today, but if the urge truly strikes, trust it.
Fair enough. Start small, but trust the motion.
Trust the motion. Fluidity is safety. Rigidity is danger.
And always remember the disappearing hands.
Yes, the visualization. If you feel a symptom or knot of stress, visualize it actively dissolving. Reclaim that energy. It belongs to you.
It is your protein. Take it back.
It is your carbs. Take them back.
On that note, I think we have successfully squeezed every single drop of insight and protein out of session 422.
I believe we have. It has been quite a journey.
Remember, SethCenter.com. Check it out. This stuff is absolute gold.
It really is. Dive into the books.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Keep it fluid, keep it spontaneous, and watch out for your own ghosts on the dance floor.
Goodbye, everyone.